Welcome to the Hidden Truth Stories channel. Today we are diving deep into an unexplored historical mystery. Imagine for a moment the vast silence of the American Southwest. It is a landscape painted in rust and deep violet shadows that stretch out as the sun begins its slow descent behind the mesa. It casts a golden glow over a world that feels as old as time itself. The wind whispers secrets through the canyons, and the ancient stones hold memories of a civilization that vanished into the haze of history. They left behind only questions and the faint, ghostly resonance of their existence. It was here in the remote and forgotten corner of the high desert of New Mexico that Dr. Aris Thorne found himself. It was the twilight of an early October evening in the year 2025. His boots were coated in red dust, and his heart was beating with the steady rhythm of anticipation that only a true seeker of the past can know. Aris was not just an archaeologist. He was an acoustic historian. He was a man who believed that history was not just written in clay or carved in stone, but was trapped in the very vibrations of the earth, waiting for the right frequency to unlock it. He had spent his career chasing what he called the Echo Code. It was a theoretical acoustic signature left behind by the ancestral Pueblones. This was a concept that most of his peers at the university dismissed as mere fancy. But Aris knew better because he had heard it in his dreams. It was a low, thrumming hum that seemed to pull him toward this specific unnamed canyon where the walls rose like cathedral spires toward the darkening indigo sky. The air was cooling rapidly. The heat of the day radiated back up from the canyon floor, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the dry, sweet perfume of pinyon pine. It was a sensory tapestry that felt incredibly grounding. Aris adjusted the strap of his heavy equipment bag and checked the readings on his handheld resonance scanner. He had custom-built this device to detect subsonic frequencies that the human ear could not perceive. The screen glowed with a soft amber light, displaying a jagged line that pulsed in time with the wind. But underneath the random noise of nature, there was a pattern. It was a structured rhythmic oscillation that had drawn him here. It was a signal that was too orderly to be the result of shifting tectonic plates or underground water. It was a song frozen in rock. He began to walk deeper into the canyon, and the sand crunched softly beneath his feet. The walls seemed to close in, but not menacingly. They felt protective, as if the earth itself were wrapping him in a blanket of silence, shutting out the modern world and all its chaotic noise. It invited him to step into a space where time holds no meaning. The deeper he went, the more the silence deepened. It became a heavy velvet presence that seemed to press against his skin, soothing and profound. He reached a natural amphitheater. It was a perfect semicircle carved by millennia of wind and rain, where the acoustics were known to be strange. A whisper could be heard 100 yards away as clearly as a shout. It was here that he saw it. There was a petroglyph etched high up on the sandstone wall. It was not the usual spiral or deer, but a series of concentric circles intersected by wavy lines. It was a visual representation of sound waves that predated modern physics by 1,000 years. Aris set his pack down on a flat rock. His movements were slow and deliberate as he treated the silence with reverence. He pulled out his primary instrument, which was a specially tuned omnidirectional speaker and a parabolic microphone. He set them up with the precision of a surgeon. The theory of the Echo Code was based on the idea that certain ancient structures were built not just for shelter or ceremony, but as recording devices. They used the properties of quartz-rich sandstone to absorb and store high-intensity ritual sounds, creating a sonic archive that could only be played back if triggered by the exact resonant frequency. It was 2025, and technology had finally caught up to this ancient wisdom, allowing Aris to synthesize the key. He sat cross-legged on the cool sand, closing his eyes for a moment to center himself. He breathed in the crisp desert air, feeling the solitude settle into his bones. It was a feeling of immense peace and curiosity. He began to adjust the dials on his synthesizer, starting with a low frequency. It was a deep bass tone that vibrated in the chest rather than the ears. The sound washed over the canyon like a gentle wave. Nothing happened at first, just the echo returning to him, distorted by the canyon walls. He adjusted the pitch, moving slowly up the scale, searching for the sympathetic vibration. The sun had fully set now, and the first stars were beginning to puncture the canopy of the night. They were bright and piercing in the thin atmosphere like diamonds scattered on black velvet. As the tone reached 432 hertz, the air in the amphitheater suddenly changed. It was not a sound exactly, but a shift in pressure. It was a feeling like the air before a thunderstorm. The sand around his boots began to dance, forming complex geometric patterns on the desert floor. The petroglyph on the wall seemed to shimmer, though it might have been a trick of the starlight. Aris held his breath, and his hands trembled slightly as he fine-tuned the frequency, locking it in. And then the canyon began to sing. It started as a low groan from the rock itself. The quartz crystals within the sandstone expanded and contracted in response to the stimulus, releasing the energy they had held for centuries. The sound grew, layering upon itself. It was a chorus of voices that were not human, but sounded like the wind given consciousness. Aris watched the meter, but the sound was not loud in the traditional sense. It was internal and resonant. He grabbed his digital recorder, ensuring every second was being captured. But he knew that what he was experiencing was more than just data. The wall beneath the petroglyph began to dissolve visually. The shadows deepened until they formed a rectangular opening that had not been there a moment before. It was a hidden alcove obscured by a trick of light and acoustic masking. With his heart pounding a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs, Aris stood up. He took his flashlight and shone the beam into the newly revealed void. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a small, dry chamber untouched by the elements. The air inside was still and smelled of ancient cedar and dried earth. He stepped inside. The silence here was absolute. It was a vacuum of sound that felt instantly calming, like stepping into a library of the cosmos. In the center of the chamber sat a single object on a stone pedestal. It was a cylinder made of polished obsidian etched with thousands of microscopic grooves. It looked eerily like a phonograph cylinder, but crafted centuries before modern invention. This was the source. The Echo Code was not just the trigger, it was the medium. Aris approached the artifact, feeling the weight of the moment. He felt the connection between his hand in 2025 and the hand that had carved this stone a millennium ago. He noticed that the pedestal had a groove, a track that aligned with the resonance he was projecting. The vibration of the canyon floor was vibrating the pedestal, causing the obsidian cylinder to slowly rotate. As it turned, the friction of the air and the ambient resonance created a voice. It was clear, distinct, and hauntingly beautiful. It was not speaking English or even a recognizable dialect of the modern Pueblo peoples. It was a proto-language, rhythmic and tonal. Aris closed his eyes, letting the translation software on his device do the work, but also letting his intuition listen. The voice was telling a story. It was a history of the stars. It spoke of a time when the Sky People came down not as gods, but as teachers. They brought the knowledge of agriculture, of seasons, and of the great song that holds the universe together. It detailed a cataclysm, a solar flare that had scorched the earth. It told how the people had retreated into the canyons, using sound to heal the land and the water. This was the hidden truth of the Echo Code. The ancestors had not just disappeared. They had evolved their understanding of physics to a point where they could encode their wisdom into the very geology of their home. They left a message for a future generation that would rediscover the harmony of the earth. The recording described a map. It was not a map of land, but of magnetic energy currents that crisscrossed the continent. This canyon was a major nexus. Aris listened entranced as the voice described the location of a seed vault buried deep beneath the mesa. It contained not grain, but the genetic memory of plants that could survive the changing climate. It was a gift from the past to the future. The narrative was soothing. It was a grandfatherly voice speaking across the abyss of time, assuring the listener that humanity had survived before and would survive again provided they listened to the earth. The cylinder spun for what felt like hours, though it was likely only minutes. It mesmerized Aris and pulled him into a trance-like state where the boundaries of his own ego melted away, leaving only the pure experience of discovery. He sat there in the dark. The only light came from the display of his recorder and the dimmed beam of his flashlight. He let the story wash over him. It was a tale of resilience of a people who loved the land so deeply they found a way to become part of it. As the cylinder slowed and eventually stopped, the resonance in the canyon faded. The rock walls returned to their silent, stoic vigil. The opening to the chamber did not close, but the feeling of permeability vanished. The magic had expended its charge for now. Aris sat in the quiet aftermath. A profound sense of gratitude filled him. He had found it. The Echo Code was real. But more than the academic victory, he felt a deep, soulful rest. The anxiety of the modern world and the rush of the year 2025 felt distant and irrelevant compared to the deep time he had just touched. He packed his gear slowly, treating every cable and sensor with a new respect. He did not take the obsidian cylinder. He knew intuitively that it belonged to the canyon. It was part of the mechanism of the place. He had the recording and the data, and that was enough. He stepped out of the alcove and back into the amphitheater. The moon had risen now. It was a great silver orb hanging low over the mesa, bathing the desert in a surreal monochromatic light. The shadows were long and soft. The sagebrush appeared as silver puffs of cloud on the ground. The air was cold, crisp, and clean, filling his lungs with the purity of the high desert. Eris began the hike back. His step was lighter and his mind was clear and calm. The mystery had been unveiled, but it had not lost its magic. Instead, the world felt larger, more interconnected, and more alive. He walked through the moonlight. The only sound was the rhythmic crunch of his boots and the distant call of a coyote. It was a lonely, beautiful sound that echoed the wild spirit of the land. As he reached his vehicle parked miles away at the trailhead, he looked back one last time at the canyon. It stood silent and dark, keeping its secrets once more. But he knew the song was still there, waiting for the next time the stars aligned and someone came with the right ears to listen. Climbed into his truck. The seat was comfortable and warm. As he turned the key, he did not turn on the radio. He drove in silence, carrying the ancient song in his heart. It was a lullaby from the ancestors that promised that even in the darkest night, there is a code, a rhythm, and a way to find the light. As he drove down the long, winding dirt road toward the horizon, the world felt safe. The mystery was solved. The night wrapped around him like a warm, heavy blanket, inviting sleep and inviting dreams. It invited the peace that comes from knowing that we are never truly alone in the dark. This mysterious journey ends here, but stay tuned for more untold stories in our next video. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any new stories. Thank you and see you again.